From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
The Honorable Mike Johnson of the state of Louisiana has received 218.
Mike Johnson is re-elected Speaker of the House, flipping two Republican holdouts to win the gavel in the first round of voting.
We'll have live reaction from Capitol Hill with Republican Congressman Burchett and our signature political panel. We'll also weigh in on breaking news. President-elect Donald Trump ordered to appear for sentencing in his New York hush money case next Friday, 10 days before his inauguration.
Plus, President Biden officially blocks Nippon's takeover of U.S. steel on grounds of national security. We'll have more on that and other national security issues with former Defense Secretary William Cohen. Thanks for joining us on this Friday evening. We were not sure when we came to air this evening whether or not we would have a Speaker of the House by this point in time, but in fact we do. It took just one round, although it was an extended round, required the vote being left open and room for two people to change their minds.
Yeah, do we call that 1.5 rounds? I'm not sure how that works. They did have to come back around again for several members who did not actually voice their decisions. But Mike Johnson, indeed, will hold the gavel in this new Congress.
And he had a chance to speak to this 119th Congress after winning the election earlier today.
Our people are asking for a thriving economy and a rebuilt middle class and strong borders and a strong military, and we can deliver that. See, these objectives and these aims don't have an R or a D behind them. They have a USA. That's what we're about.
We bring you a conversation now with a member of the Republican Conference who is part of that vote today. Republican Congressman Burchett of Tennessee is with us live on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's good to have you back, sir. Welcome to Balance of Power. What do you expect now that this is done from Speaker Johnson in return for your vote?
Well, we better have fiscal restraint. We're $36 trillion in debt. We can't keep going down this path. And, the DOGE group, Vivek and Elon have talked about cutting $2 trillion. Well, dadgummit, we put $1 trillion of debt on the books every 100 days. So we gotta start making some serious decisions, and the days of voting for largesse for your district need to be over.
Well, so Mike Johnson was able to earn your vote today, but how hard is it going to be for him to earn your vote then on, say, a budget reconciliation package that includes trillions of dollars in tax cuts?
Well, my theory on tax cuts, I'll have to evaluate it a little more, but when people aren't paying taxes, they're not sticking that money under a mattress somewhere. They're investing it. They're putting it in the bank's loaning it out. They're creating more and more business. So if we can combine that with cuts, I think you're going to see the economy will rise to the occasion and cut out some of these worthless programs that were so in this involvement we are all over the world, $200 billion to Ukraine, things like that. And eventually we're going to have to rein in our Pentagon. Dadgum, they hadn't passed an audit, 7 or 8 audits. This last NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, I believe we gave them $6 billion new dollars to punish them, I guess. We've got to show some fiscal restraint all over the board, and it's got to start with us right now.
Several of your colleagues on the Freedom Caucus, 11 names on a letter to the conference here addressing the Speaker. It says, today we voted for Mike Johnson for Speaker of the House because of our steadfast support for President Trump to ensure his timely certification, and actually speaks to reservations that they still have with regard to the future Speaker here, Mike Johnson. How difficult will it be for him to wrangle this majority of one?
Probably the second toughest job in America, right behind being a single mom, I guess, because you've got 435 people, and every one of those has as my daughter would say, a ginormous ego, and he's got to deal with that. And we'll have to, cross that. I hate the cliches, but the reality is we will cross that bridge when we come to it. And hopefully, though, we'll get behind this America First agenda, and that'll be combined with making some serious cuts in our government spending. I can't say that enough, but that's got to happen.
Well, the next bridge you have to cross sir, I believe will be a vote on the rules package that has been put forward that does include some changes from the 118th Congress, including that it will take 9 members to bring a motion to vacate against the Speaker. That's, of course, one more than the number, including yourself, that ousted Kevin McCarthy in the fall of 2023. Will you vote for these rules, sir?
I will look at them. I'm leaning towards voting for them. I think that's reasonable. One vote, somebody can have a bad day or be ticked off that their own bill didn't get up, and then we have a bad flu season and we're out of the majority. We have 3 or 4 person majority, and at any given time, let's just look at the reality of the numbers. Our whip team, Tom Emmert and Guy Riesenthaler, Guy and I came to Congress together, and it's a day-to-day chore just to take roll to see who's going to be here before we get to the floor and we take a roll call vote, because at any given time we could be in the minority. So it's just that razor thin. But it's not supposed to be easy, ma'am. Democracy is something you got to fight for and you got to want it. And I do. The people that I represent in Tennessee, they want it. They fought literally and died for that right.
Well, so what happened on the floor today, Congressman? The members who changed their votes, Self and Norman, there were conversations being had. There were phone calls being made. Did they include deals? Do you know anything? Have you heard from your colleagues about what it took to convince them? Or was this whole thing preordained? Some have suggested that the Freedom Caucus had a plan to do this.
Well, of course, the Freedom Caucus had a plan. I vote as conservative, more conservative than some of the Freedom Caucus members. I'm just not a member. I always tell people I'm conservative. I'm just not angry about it. But what went down on that thing, I put it on my video at X or Twitter or whatever, at Tim Burchett. And I just said, you had Ralph Norman, I believe he voted for Jim Jordan, and Keith Self voted for Byron Donalds. And I went to the Speaker after the vote, and I said, and everybody was clamoring around, and they were crowding around the people, and they're getting in their face. I was there, as you stated. I've been in that situation. Everybody's mad at you, and everybody's thumping their chest at you and telling you, what's your plan? What's your plan? Well, you don't have to have a plan. You just vote your conscience. I mean, that's what these gentlemen did, and I did when I voted to depose the former Speaker. And so I said to the Speaker, I said, maybe you ought to get them off on the room and just see if you can talk to them and see what we can do to ease their concerns. And frankly, I guess he took my advice. And at that time, and I told Keith, the Speaker would like to see you, buddy. I got him away from everybody that was in his face, so to speak. And I assumed that they talked a little bit, and I assume I wasn't in the room, but I'll just go out on a limb and say that there was probably a phone call from President Trump. And I believe he put some salve on their wounds and eased their concerns, because there were they were very legitimate concerns. And that's how it went down. It wasn't a quid pro quo. I think it was just an agreement to listen. And that we need more transparency in this thing. That's what really caused the former Speaker to lose, is because there wasn't transparency. We weren't told what went on. We were forced into a corner on votes. And I find Mike Johnson to be a very honorable man. He loves his family. He loves the Lord. He's never lied to me. And I like Mike Johnson. I think he's an honorable guy, and I think he'll do a great job.
Well, the president-elect likes him, too. He, of course, advocated for him to remain on as Speaker. And, Congressman, I know you need to run to vote, but does that effectively make Donald Trump the real Speaker of the House and Mike Johnson just gets the title?
No, ma'am. But Donald Trump is the biggest dog in the pound. And anybody who says that's not true is just wrong, or they don't know what they're talking about, because this is it's the human elements involved in all this, and I don't find that to be the truth at all. And if it didn't go down, if we didn't elect Mike Johnson Speaker, it wouldn't have been a failure for President Trump either. This is just the system. It's a system laid out in the Constitution, and it works. It works every dadgum time. It maybe doesn't work the way some people want it to, or doesn't work in the time frame that they have planned out. But as it turned out this time, it worked in the first round. But you got to realize in the past, it's always been, kumbaya. It's the same old stuff. Leadership, people just move up the chain. because they live long enough, or they raise enough money, or they polish enough apples. And those days need to be gone. And that's what's gotten us $36 trillion in debt. So I would hope at some point that we get past all that and we start just doing the people's work up here. I know that's a big ask, but I hope we can do that this go around.
Well, sir, we hope you can join us again soon. We thank you very much for your time this evening. Republican Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee. Appreciate it. And joining us now for more are Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson and Megan Scully here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thank you both for being with us. We just heard from the congressman the suggestion that he doesn't buy into this notion that it's Donald Trump who's really the Speaker of the House. Megan, of course, it is Mike Johnson who is the Speaker. But would this have happened today if Donald Trump hadn't applied the necessary pressure?
I think so. Trump's endorsement of Johnson just several days ago certainly made things look much more favorable for him. And certainly the phone calls he made from the golf course today, we should say, to the members who were opposing Johnson was a crucial element in getting him across the finish line on the first round. Trump really wanted, I believe, Johnson to win and this not to go on for 4 days like it happened with Kevin McCarthy. You know, he's about to be inaugurated in, under 2 weeks or just over 2 weeks. And, it is better for him if Johnson comes into this job again at a point of strength as opposed to looking like he's beleaguered.
So what's the statement that the Freedom Caucus made today? Or what was the message to Mike Johnson? They clearly wanted to make a statement, but not really disrupt the cart here, right?
Right. They wanted to say, okay, pal, we voted for you. Basically, here's a list of what we want for that vote. Here is the cost of that vote. And I think, as you pointed out to me earlier today, there were 11 names on that letter.
That's right.
And you only need 9 to overturn a speaker. So
can he do what they're asking?
It depends if he can get the majorities for it, if he can convince Donald Trump that this is the way things should go. Mike Johnson has, in the past, though, and in the very recent past, has stood up to Donald Trump, or I wouldn't say stood up to him, but didn't do what he wanted. He never made a big deal about it, but, they didn't agree on the debt ceiling fight in December, and that didn't happen the way Trump wanted it to happen. But I think Mike Johnson may only have a few more strikes before then Donald Trump sort of turns on him. I don't, with all due respect to the congressman, he described Donald Trump as putting a salve on it and calming down. That doesn't sound like the Donald Trump we all know. He probably called them and said, get in line.
Well, it's not just the debt ceiling Donald Trump wants done away with, or at least suspended until he's out of office. He's asking for a big legislative agenda. And was today not proof, Megan, that that's actually going to be much harder to execute than you might think with Republicans entirely in control of Washington?
It's going to be incredibly difficult. Today, what we saw was about a half a dozen members who initially did not, half a dozen Republicans who initially did not vote for anybody for the speaker. And they ultimately came around. But that was certainly a show of the force. And then you had the 3 who voted for somebody other. 2 ultimately changed their minds and voted for Johnson. But this is just the beginning. And as we move into debates over tax or immigration and all of these other issues that Trump really wants to hit on, you have so many factions within this Republican majority, and this Republican majority is so narrow. Right now, it's a 4-seat majority. It will go down to a 2-seat majority soon, right after Trump's election, with Elise Stefanik and Tim Walz leaving to join the administration. Granted, there will be special elections, for those seats, and they're likely to stay Republican. But in those crucial first 100 days of the Trump administration, you're going to be looking at the narrowest of majorities and so many differences within that majority.
Fascinating news today, unexpected as well. Donald Trump facing sentencing in New York 10 days before his inauguration. This is the Bragg case in Manhattan, not tied to Jack Smith or the federal government here. What's going on? Could he potentially go to jail before he's sworn into office?
No. This is, and Justice Merchan, the state judge who is in charge of this, has already sort of signaled that isn't going to happen. Despite the very dramatic headlines, this will not be as dramatic as it sounds. Justice Merchan is already, it's a tool to allow Donald Trump to appeal that conviction. You must be sentenced in a reasonable amount of time. And the prosecutor, Alvin Bragg, had said, let's just wait 4 years to sentence him when he could go to jail as an 82-year-old ex-president. But instead, the judge said, Merchan, let's just discharge it now, essentially sentence him to nothing, and then he can appeal the conviction. So it's a maneuver. It's a mechanical thing.
Great to know. Next week and the week after we're already complicated enough. Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson, Megan Scully, thank you so much on a breaking news day here in Washington. Coming up, we'll spend some time with Charlie Dent, the former Republican congressman from Pennsylvania, with more on what is next for the newly re-elected Speaker, Mike Johnson. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
None of us will get exactly what we want. The fundamental collective goal of this body is to make progress for the American people in which we represent. And we have done just that under Mike's leadership. It is my honor to present our conference's nominee for the Speaker of the People's House, the Honorable Mike Johnson from the state of Louisiana.
Republican Congresswoman Lisa McClain of Michigan earlier today nominating Mike Johnson to be the next Speaker of the House in this 119th Congress, now officially underway. Of course, as we learned together live here on Bloomberg TV and radio, Mike Johnson survived the first round after a couple of lawmakers changed their votes. 2 Republicans. Joining us now is Charlie Dent, the former Republican congressman from Pennsylvania, watching along with us today in Washington. Congressman, it's great to see you. Great to have you at the table on such an important day. There's something usually festive in the air about the first day of a new Congress. It came with some challenges today, and I wonder, after what we saw with several, I guess a couple of hours of waiting for this final tally, what Mike Johnson is in for in this new Congress.
Well, with this very slim majority, everything's going to be difficult. And today, swearing-in day, the Speaker vote is supposed to be the easiest vote of the session. Well, it wasn't that easy. There was a little bit of a micro or mini drama today. But I wasn't surprised that he got it on the first ballot. I thought it might go to a second, but he got it. But at the end of the day, though, you can see what happened. He can only afford to lose 2 votes on anything. Well, in this case, it was only 1 vote he could lose. But typically, it'll be 2 votes. They'll need 218. And so every day, there's going to be somebody out there who wants to make a point, get some attention, or might have legitimate issues with whatever's being considered. And so he's got almost no margin for error. So it's going to be a tough time. And on the issues that matter, to keep the government funded, not to default on the debt ceiling, they're going to need Democratic votes because there just aren't enough House Republicans to do so. So there'll be a necessary bipartisan collaboration. And those people who held out today were the ones who complained typically about any type of compromise that Johnson enters into.
Well, and did so when Kevin McCarthy entered a bipartisan debt ceiling and spending agreement with Democrats, leading to his ouster. Johnson, in theory, is going to have more insulation from that kind of mood. If the rules package is adopted today, it will take 9 members to bring forward a motion to vacate. How much more wiggle room does that give him now than he had previously in his months as Speaker before this?
Oh, I think that gives him a lot of it's a fairly big cushion. But the bigger benefit for Johnson is that Trump is going to be there to bail him out, too.
But he needs Trump to continue to be
Trump,
there.
And let's face it, Trump is probably the one who got those 2 members back in line today. He got them back in line. Trump doesn't need the drama. He wants to have the certification done. He didn't want to be overshadowed by a messy speaker contest. So it's different now that there's a Republican president, and that will help enforce some level of discipline that they probably couldn't do while Joe Biden was president.
Earlier today, during the House proceedings, I just want to ask you about another major story that broke, and I would suggest, Congressman, that on any other day than a Speaker's vote, this would have been our lead story, and it has to do with Joe Biden's decision to block the U.S. Steel Nippon deal. It was announced, of course, former Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida talked about his decision in the role in the 119th Congress. We'll get to that after. I just wonder your thoughts on this decision by this White House and whether it could be reversed.
Well, I think this is an absolutely horrendous decision by the White House to override this Nippon U.S. Steel deal. I mean, just yesterday, the State Department approved a military sale to the government of Japan, a necessary military sale, because they're an important national security partner. Today, they just blocked $2.7 billion, billions of dollars worth of investment into U.S. Steel because now Japan apparently is a national security threat. Yesterday, they're a partner. Today, they're a threat. Yeah. But the consequence is these steel plants in western Pennsylvania, these integrated plants, are probably going to shut down, maybe the one in Indiana, too. U.S. Steel used to have a presence of over 300,000 employees in that part of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Today, they're less than 20,000. The trajectory is not good. Why? Why would we reject fresh capital and the best technology in this industry? The alternative is going to be more subsidies and tariffs. And I think that would be a disaster for this industry and for this country and for steel workers writ large. So I think it's a big mistake. I suspect you're going to see litigation over this probably as early as next week.
And what's Donald Trump going to do with this? Because on the campaign trail, he was singing the same tune as Biden. Don't let this deal go through. Yeah,
both. One of the few things that Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Donald Trump agreed on was tanking this deal. But what they didn't anticipate, they had the politics all wrong on this. There are people in that part of the state, including the mayor of Braddock, Pennsylvania, where John Fetterman is from, who support this agreement. Local people understand this industry better. They understand where this is going. They want this deal to happen because they know if it doesn't happen, a lot of people are going to be out of work. So I think the people in Washington got the politics all wrong. I hope Donald Trump reverses his position and gets to a better place. It would actually help him politically within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
What happens if a Cleveland Cliffs or another buyer comes along?
Well, I would say Cleveland Cliffs could have offered more money than Nippon Steel, but they didn't. They offered less. And you'll probably see somewhat of a monopoly of the steel industry in the United States. And then this is going to have impacts on prices. I suspect the automotive sector will react because steel prices will go up, and other major industries that rely on steel will also probably be objecting. And, where's Lena Khan at the FTC when you need her? This is a time when there's a legitimate antitrust case to be made if Cleveland Cliffs were to take this company. But again, they offered much less per share than Nippon did. They could have offered more.
Well, so when we consider the administration's argument, the national security grounds they say they made this decision on is that it is in interest because steel is so critical. It is in interest of American hands to have steel manufacturing. Effectively, you're saying this decision is going to lead to less steel manufacturing in the United States. What would prevent that then? If these are about to close because they couldn't have a foreign buyer come in to buy U.S. steel, what actually would fix that?
Well, I think we have to stop for a second and say, in this country, we really want foreign direct investment. And it's a good thing. In fact, President-elect Trump just said a few weeks ago that companies that were going to invest over $1 billion would be welcomed with open arms, unless you're Nippon Steel. I mean, I don't get this. Everybody knows this is a good deal. Steel, is it important to our national security? Yes. But last I checked, Japan was an ally. We have military bases there. We just approved another military sale to Japan yesterday. China is the challenge, not Japan. And so everybody's got this all wrong. And so, again, it's okay if we rely on our friends and partners for critical materials, and steel is one. And frankly, I can make a case there are other materials that we need that are more critical than steel, and that, there are things that we do need to make here in greater number than we do. But it's okay if our allies make some of these products, too. And in this case, they're going to invest here, so we make it more and better here.
So who needs to get to Donald Trump to change his mind in your view?
Well, that's the great question. Who is that? I mean, I think the appeal is, maybe a senator-elect, a Senator McCormick or somebody like that maybe could explain the politics of this better to Donald Trump. He needs to hear from voices he trusts. Maybe an Elon Musk. I think an Elon Musk would understand the value of this. And perhaps somebody like that. Some of these business guys who understand investment and trade could make this case a compelling case. But it's also in his political interest. So hopefully some of his advisors, Republican advisors in Pennsylvania, will persuade him to get to a smarter place than he is now.
All right, Congressman, thank you so much for your time and joining us here in Washington. Lovely to have you in studio. Former Congressman from Pennsylvania, Charlie Dent, here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. And as we consider the moves of Donald Trump, it is a question of where this is going to rank, Joe, on his listing of priorities when he comes into office, as there's much he would like to accomplish legislatively. and otherwise in his first 100 days.
That's for sure. We're talking about sequencing priorities coming up in the new Congress. The border seems to be taking the prize on that, but we'll find out.
Yeah, and of course, there's confirmation hearings we still have to get through, including for some of his national security team. Still ahead, a former U.S. Secretary of Defense will join us. William Cohen is next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg.
These are difficult days in our home state of Louisiana, where I come from. We all know about the terrorist attack in New Orleans, and it's really shaken our state. People are reeling from that attack. It took the lives of 14 innocent people, and it injured dozens more.
That was newly re-elected House Speaker Mike Johnson talking about the deadly New Year's attack in his home state of Louisiana. The incident has raised questions surrounding the strength of U.S. security when it comes to domestic terrorism. Joining us now for more here on Bloomberg TV and radio is William Cohen. He's former U.S. Secretary of Defense under the Clinton administration. Sir, welcome back to Balance of Power. As we consider the events of this week and the FBI saying that the suspected perpetrator in the New Orleans attack specifically was inspired by ISIS, when Christopher Wray, the current director of the FBI, has been warning about lone wolf, homegrown domestic terror for well over a year now. How concerned should Americans be about more attacks like this coming?
I think we should be very concerned about it. Christopher Wray was right. The FBI was right to forewarn us that the growth of domestic type of extremism is growing in this country. It is fueled by the rage that seems to be prevalent throughout the country today, that someone is always on the verge of being outraged about something or other, and it's being fueled by political figures that go on television, radio, and encourage that type of rhetoric. So I think as far as ISIS itself is concerned, ISIS has been diminished, but it's not dead as a theology as such, as any sort of philosophy of trying to take down the United States and all Western countries. So I think we've got to be even more aggressive than we are overseas, to be sure. President-elect Trump, for example, has talked about pulling our troops out of Syria, and they are there to prevent ISIS from regaining a stronghold in that region so they then can recruit even more people. So we have to keep our foot on the pedal as far as going after those areas where ISIS is trying to reformulate and regain control. Secondly, I think we have to really start thinking about what we need to do in terms of curtailing the kind of information that is put out over the internet. This is going to run smack into freedom of speech, et cetera, but we cannot afford to have propaganda that promotes violence against the United States and all Americans and Westerners and allow that to go unchallenged. So I think those two things at a minimum will have to take place.
I'm sure it's not lost on you, sir, that we're talking about, with regard to both cases here, individuals who serve their country in the military. Yesterday on Balance of Power, we spoke with Democratic Congressman Troy Carter of Louisiana. This happened in his district in New Orleans, in the French Quarter. He's married to a major general in the Army. Here's what he had to say.
This individual once wore the colors of our military, who served in Afghanistan, served in the United States Army, has become radicalized and turned on the country that means so much to all of us. We have to further evaluate everyone, because all of our enemies don't always wear a sign that they are our enemies. Sometimes the enemy disguises themselves, as this individual did, as a patriot.
Some have suggested, sir, that it's time for a serious conversation about extremism in the military. How are you viewing this?
Well, I don't know that he was extreme in the military. This is the point that I think needs to be made. That individual had left the military some years ago. During his service in the military, apparently there were no indications that he was, quote, radicalized or in any way supporting ISIS in any way other than the United States. Once he left the military, he started to have some real hardship personally. 2 divorces, going on his 3rd divorce. His finances were sliding away from him. He became desperate. He became angry. And during that time, he became radicalized. So I don't think we should go back and look at our military and say, oh, anyone who goes in the military has to be suspect here. And secondly, the individual, the Master Sergeant in Vegas, that Master Sergeant was active duty. He had no signs whatsoever of being depressed in any way, have any adverse intentions against the United States. Apparently, he made a political decision in terms of the symbolism, but he committed suicide. Now, is that to say that everybody has to be on watch coming out of the military? I think the military does a pretty good job in evaluating people, monitoring them to make sure that while they're deployed, while they're under extraordinary stress, that they are taken into account. They have a holistic approach. They have a buddy system in the Army, as a matter of fact, to make sure if one of the members of that buddy system is experiencing any difficulties, the other friend steps in. So there are a lot of things that we practice in the military to make sure that those people under stress don't crack under them.
Well, and in the Department of Defense specifically, which, of course, you ran, and for the defense secretary nominee put forward by Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, for other national security-oriented nominees like Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence, there are some who have argued in the aftermath of both of these incidences there should be a fast tracking of their confirmations, that these nominees need to become immediately able to act in this second Trump administration. Do you think this event underscores the need for these people to be confirmed quickly, or should put greater scrutiny and perhaps dampen their odds of confirmation?
I think the nominees themselves have to go under greater scrutiny. To fast-track any of them now under the circumstances, I think would be a mistake, and a big mistake. I think we want to know who are the people who are going to occupy the most powerful positions in our government. What is their character? What is their capability? Because they're going to be the figures in the face of those institutions, and their character and capabilities will filter down to all of those below them. They will be setting a standard of whether to look up to or look down upon. So I don't think that it would fast track anybody. I would say, show me the capabilities, reveal the character, and if we're satisfied, we will vote to confirm you. Absent that, do not be pressured by an external event such as this or these 2 events to say now we have to have them no matter what their capabilities are.
Well, while we have you, sir, let's zero in, if we could, on Donald Trump's pick to run the Pentagon. I don't think we've had a chance to ask you about Pete Hegseth at this stage, having met with many senators, having refuted many of the accusations against him. There are still questions about some of the sexual assault allegations against him, as well as his history with alcohol. The extent to which you've heard this conversation leads you to believe what about a Secretary Hegseth and what that would mean for the Pentagon?
Well, I would want to be sitting on the Senate Armed Services Committee and passing those judgments. I think it would not be becoming for me to pass judgment on Pete Hegseth. It would look self-serving, and it would be contrary to my own belief that I should never either criticize my predecessor or my successor. Here, I think the issue is he's obviously has a great education. He obviously has a commitment to this country in terms of being patriotically committed to this country. But there are other issues that have to be explored in terms of whether or not his views on Uniform Code of Military Justice, for one. Are there provisions, by way of example, that he finds objectionable, et cetera? I could go through a whole list of questions, but these are for the senators to ask and not for me. All I'm saying is for the senators, you have a duty to make sure that the people you confirm for one of the most important positions in our country, second only, I believe, to the President of the United States in terms of being in that chain of command. We want somebody who is there, who has great character, has the capability to do the job, and you can count on to be there every moment, 24/7. I can tell you from personal experience, I got by on about 4 to 4.5 hours of sleep a night. The rest of it was completely committed to that job. That's what you want to have in the way of a Secretary of Defense. And to the extent he can show that he has that commitment and the Senates are satisfied, they will confirm him.
We're out of time, Secretary, but would you at that time allow yourself to have a drink at dinner?
Well, now that I'm off duty, I think I'll probably have one just for you, Joe.
I'll take that for
Cheers.
now. William Cohen, we appreciate your take on all of this, the former U.S. Secretary of Defense. Thank you, sir, and Happy New Year. Coming up, opening day for the new Congress as Mike Johnson secures the speakership. He's got the gavel, and our signature panel is up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The Honorable Mike Johnson of the state of Louisiana, having received a majority of the votes cast, is duly elected Speaker of the House of Representatives for the 119th Congress.
Making it official, you can almost see him breathing the sigh of relief. Mike Johnson gets to hold the gavel for the 119th Congress. Took only one round, technically, of votes. A few members had to change their votes to make it happen. And joining us now, our signature panel, Rick Davis, Stone Court Capital partner, Republican strategist, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University, senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Great to see you both again. We lived through this together, Rick, in real time on Bloomberg TV and radio. So now that it's done, what's Mike Johnson in for? What are we in for?
Well, I think it's an indication that it's going to be a pretty wild ride this year, or maybe for the next 2 years, because it proved what we all thought and have been talking about ever since the election, which is these narrow margins can create a lot of mischief in the hands of just a few people. And that's exactly what we saw today. People got together, decided to make a little protest at his expense. It didn't go to more than one ballot. History will indicate that he won on the first ballot, even though we know that it took a little cajoling before that was going to happen.
Well, and cajoling specifically, Jeannie, from the president-elect. Donald Trump had to get on the phone. And in fact, some of the members who were reluctant to vote for Johnson initially ultimately came out and said they only did so because they support President Trump's agenda. So I wonder how much we can expect the desire of Donald Trump to actually be what drives the House majority. Even if members don't want to go along, will they ultimately in the name of the president?
You know, I think they will in the name of the president. And, you know, that's where they're going to hold Mike Johnson's feet to the fire. It was fascinating to look at some of the statements like Chip Roy on social media afterwards and the letter that the House Freedom Caucus put out immediately. Really lukewarm support for Mike Johnson, a lot of support for Donald Trump's agenda and saying you need to be authentic, essentially, Mike Johnson, in terms of seeing this through and really chastising him for his speakership in the 118th Congress and hoping that he does better. So this was really a warning from these members that they are going to be watching and they are prepared to take action if he doesn't live up to what he has promised and what they think Donald Trump deserves.
Jeannie references this letter from the Freedom Caucus, Rick, which spells it all out here. We voted for Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House because of our steadfast support of President Trump, highlighting reservations they still have with him. They're not afraid of the Speaker or Trump, it seems.
No, I think what you clearly saw today was a message, right? This was orchestrated. And what you saw was we have more than the 9 votes that we need to recall you as Speaker. And so just don't think that that change in the rule is somehow going to make you safer. And the misalignment is amazing because they knew that they were going to get a call from Donald Trump. And they knew that they could go back to the floor and to their constituents and say, we did this for Donald Trump. We didn't do this for Mike Johnson. And by the way, that helps Donald Trump because now he looks like the only person who can get anything done in the House of Representatives. Totally emasculates Speaker Johnson on his first day on the job. And so when you really look at the interests that the various people had, the only loser of the day was the guy who won.
Wow.
Pretty incredible. When you say it looks like Donald Trump is the only one who can get things done in the House of Representatives, is that not actually the reality?
Well, he's failed before, right? He tried to insert himself in the debt ceiling argument and failed miserably. And so it doesn't mean he always gets what he wants. But I think it's safe to say that if there's one person who has a better chance of actually getting things aligned, it'll be under Donald Trump's tutelage. And I think that's what he wants. He wants all these chambers to be under his will, to do the things he wants them to do, regardless of the politics in the chamber. And that's what he did today.
Jeannie, what's next for Hakeem Jeffries? He managed to keep his conference together, which was not a surprise, but he could well be in a position, some have suggested to be Speaker even by accident, but in a position to have some influence and work with Mike Johnson if the Speaker of the House wants to get anything done.
Yeah, and I think he made that very clear in his brief speech today. I thought he did a very good job of laying out what Democrats are hoping to do, and I think they should do, which is lay out an agenda for the middle class and stick to it and work with Republicans where and when they are working for the middle class and oppose them at every turn when those interests are for the ultra-wealthy and corporations. And I think that's what we're going to see Hakeem Jeffries do. He also took a very interesting dig at Republicans about the fact that they have not had belief in our electoral process, and said Democrats are willing to stop and accept defeat when they've been defeated, unlike their opposition. So I thought it was a good speech, and I think that's what we're going to see Democrats do. They've been aligned behind Hakeem Jeffries from the start.
We didn't just get speeches in the House today, Jeannie. We had some in the Senate as well, as it too began the 119th Congress. And the new Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, had this to say about ensuring that the filibuster remains.
And one of my priorities as leader will be to ensure that the Senate stays the Senate. That means preserving the legislative filibuster, the Senate rule that today is perhaps the greatest impact on preserving the founders' vision of the United States Senate.
Jeannie, how important was that statement?
I'm so glad you raised this, because this, I think, is one of the most important things that happened today, is the support for the filibuster. And the big question now is how long before Donald Trump gets very frustrated with the fact that there is still a filibuster, which means he's got to get 60, and that is going to be terribly difficult. And, unlike what the majority leader said, it is not the framers who devised the filibuster. There's nothing constitutional about that. It is a Senate rule, and, of course, something that senators feel very strongly about, but something that impedes majoritarian process in that body.
He mentioned the words regular order. Did you start laughing?
No, I still hold out hope. Maybe in the Senate, not the House.
Okay.
Yeah, look, I mean, everybody comes in with this drive to try and do it the way it's supposed to be done. And
individual
that is,
spending bills.
Actually, do the spending bills as they come. And look, I mean, you got to give him a shot. This is a brand new majority leader of the United States Senate. We haven't had one in decades. In that regard. And so let's see what John Thune is able to accomplish. I think today was an important day in the United States Senate, kind of overshadowed by all the shenanigans in the House of Representatives. But I think we can see leadership coming out of the Senate, and bipartisan leadership. There's no indication that I have that they won't resume the bipartisanship that really framed the Senate over the last 2 years.
All right, Rick Davis and Jeannie Zaino will stick with us as we look ahead to what is going to be an incredibly busy week ahead in Washington. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. As we wrap up this week in Washington, we're buckling up for the next one, which starts with the certification of Donald Trump's presidential victory on Monday, followed by former President Jimmy Carter's state funeral on Thursday, and ending with the aforementioned Donald Trump having to appear in court for sentencing in his New York hush money case on Friday, just 10 days before his inauguration. Back with us now are our closers, Rick Davis and Jeannie Zaino. Rick, I actually want to begin with the end of the week when Donald Trump, whether virtually or in person, is going to have to show up to get sentenced for a case in which he was convicted of 34 felony counts. With it being this close to his inauguration, is this something that could potentially, kind of help him actually gain some political advantage as he comes into office, given the historic nature with which we have seen him get a boost from his legal woes?
The history behind Donald Trump and indictments and convictions is it's helped him with the people. And I think this is no exception. I mean, the reality is the judge should look at this set of circumstances and say, this man's a week away from getting sworn in as president of the United States. He's got better things to do than to sit either on a Zoom or in a courtroom and hear a judge pass judgment. The reality is he'll have to take his medicine, but this is a ridiculous use of future president's time.
Fascinating. Jeannie, we've got January 6th. which, of course, has taken on new meaning since what happened 4 years ago, and most seem to think it's going to be a non-event. It'll be the formality that it always was. And so I would ask you about the state funeral for Jimmy Carter. That eulogy from Joe Biden could be his final speech as president. What will he say?
Yeah, it's fascinating because, you know, the two of them really bookend a moment in American politics. And so I think it is going to be something of a farewell address, if you will, from President Biden. But, of course, reflecting on the amazing life of President Jimmy Carter. And, of course, they were very close and spent a good deal of time together and shared so many things in Washington and out. So I do think it's going to be a combination of those things. And I think we will hear President Biden remember all that Jimmy Carter did for the country and the world. And this is somebody who I think we have to remember is probably more than any modern president going to be remembered by people outside of the United States as a hero for everything he did after he left office.
Well, and I would point out we will have special coverage of the state funeral of Jimmy Carter here on Bloomberg TV and radio beginning at 9 a.m. on Thursday. But, Jeannie, I don't want to let the events of Monday go completely. It will be an important day, as Joe says, given what happened on January 6th 4 years ago. How important is it to the American people, to the country, to see the democratic process and the peaceful transition of power work as designed this time around?
It's incredibly important. 2021 was the first time we had violence and the first time that our peaceful transfer of power was, disrupted, if you will, at least for a period of time. And we can never let that happen again. So I think it's important that it's peaceful and that we remember and never repeat what happened January 6, 2021.
Will the Capitol be the safest place in the country on Monday?
It'll certainly be well protected. Yeah. I think the only thing that you would worry about are the members themselves.
Say no more on this opening day of the 119th Congress. What a great conversation with Rick Davis and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino. Thank you both for a great day of analysis with breaking news starting at high noon. Here we are. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter if you want to read up more on all the stories we've talked about today on the terminal and online.
Enjoy the weekend. Get some rest because it's going to be a busy one next week. And we'll, of course, have all of it covered for you here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.